Welcome to another episode of Governance Essentials for Honorary Justice Associations. Today, we're diving into a topic that underpins everything in good governance, but is often taken for granted until it starts to be eroded away, and that's called trust. Whether you're part of a non-for-profit, a statutory board, or a charity-based governance group, trust is what holds the culture, the conversations, and the confidence of your stakeholders together. I'm your host, Paul Mracek, and today joining me is President of the ACJA and a very experienced JP, Rachael O'Grady. Rachael, welcome to today. How are you?
Great. Thank you, Paul. It's really great to be part of this conversation. And this topic about trust really is something I truly believe in, as it's the heartbeat of any board, because without it, everything from decision making to member engagement begins to suffer.
That's true. That's true. So trust can often feel like an intangible concept for people, something that's either there or it's not. But in reality, trust is built moment by moment, especially in governance where decisions carry weight and implications for people, policies and public perception, especially some of the ones that we've heard recently here in Victoria. We had the Commissioner of Police who lost the confidence of his other police and they voted a non-confidence for him and he ended up having to resign. So trust was very much into the extent in that place. And in that case, the reason I say this is because the New Zealand ex-police commissioner starts today as the head of the Commissioner of Police here in Victoria. So there you go. There's a good example of trust and how it can impact on things for it. So for Honorary Justice Associations, trust is more than a soft skill. It's a strategic asset. When trust is present, boards are more effective, engaged and respected. When it's absent, even routine decisions can feel like uphill battles. To begin, Rachael, can you explain why or what trust in governance really involves and why it's such a critical focus for Honorary Justice Associations?
Absolutely, Paul. So trust is what is at the foundation of a healthy, thriving association. And that begins with trust in governance, where board members have the confidence in each other's integrity, their accountability, and their intentions. It means that people can speak openly, they can disagree respectfully, and they know that the group is working towards the same goals, even when the path isn't an easy one. So with Justice of the Peace Associations or Honorary Justice Associations, where directors often volunteer their time and effort, trust is essential for two main reasons. Firstly, because they're representing justice in the community on behalf of association members, public and membership trust must begin with that internal trust. So for public and association members, trust is, for me, the willingness to be vulnerable to the actions of the board directors, because we believe they have good intentions and will behave well towards us. Now, I like to use a simple analogy here as an example of what I'm trying to convey around that vulnerability and trust. The simple analogy is the vulnerability of a plane passenger trusting in a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that feeling.
Yes, that's true. Actually, I always thought that was an interesting response when you fly in Europe. When the plane lands, all the passengers all clap instantaneously that they've actually landed and landed well. I think there's a good example of them. They're showing they appreciate and trust the pilots for what they were doing.
Absolutely. Totally.
So let's start here. Why does trust matter so much in the context of board governance from your perspective?
Well, that's actually a big question. And when I was thinking about this, I thought so often you hear media outlets run polls to gauge the public perception of the most trusted professions. Why do they do this? And the answer being that trust does matter. Because trust affects everything from how decisions are made to how risks are shared and how openly people speak up. A high trust board can work through complexity and challenge with confidence, where a low trust board, on the other hand, they often get stuck in the politics and the silence or the indecision. So when trust is present, directors will feel safe to ask questions, they'll challenge assumptions, and they'll take ownership. And that's when governance really works. It's almost like having that inbuilt devil's advocate, at work. And in a board. You can have those opposing views and feel safe.
That's true. That's
Trust.
true. The other thing that I always find is that people misunderstand what the basis of trust is within a board. If you have legislation that requires a certain level of governance criteria, and then there's the issue of people saying, well, I'm part of a committee that's looking into that, you should trust our results. But it's not a matter of trust. It's a matter that the legislation requires that you do your due diligence to make sure that you feel confident about what it is, and that you need to trust each other to the point that, and then you made that comment about internal trust. You got to make sure that you trust yourselves internally, that you are doing the best to your ability, and you trust each other within the board that you're doing it. It's not got anything to do from a personal perspective.
Absolutely. One of the examples I was thinking of um, was strategic planning done properly embodies all that is important in building and maintaining trust, because it provides a platform where multiple perspectives are obtained during the various stages of the planning. It requires that collective thinking. It requires ongoing communication. It aligns systems and processes and skill sets.
Right.
And it requires accountability through reporting against your strategic plan objectives. And
Yeah.
it also allows flexibility to develop and evolve when earlier assumptions that a board may have and conclusions may change over time. So to me, that embodies so much of what we talk about in terms of trust and governance.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I mean, the other thing, of course, is that you have to demonstrate that trust at your AGMs. So,
Yeah,
one of the things that I always found I did is I always took the strategic plan and said, this is what we said we were going to do at the last AGM, which the members then trust that you'll implement, and then say, here is what we said we would do, and this is what we did do from a
yeah,
transparency perspective. And showing them what you've done shows to them that you can create that trust, and that you achieve the outcomes that you're looking for. So we've been talking about trust a fair bit here, and
yeah.
and I know that we've often talked about different trust models, and one of the ones that I think was quite useful that you brought up, which is called the balanced trust model, or what is often referred to as the above and below the line framework. Can you explain to us and our listeners on how this could be of help with understanding trust for people?
Right. Well, I'll do my best to explain this. In a nutshell, the above and below the line model helps us reflect on how we respond, especially under pressure. So, starting with the above the line behaviours, they include ownership, responsibility, and accountability. And we've already touched on some of those and what we've already talked about. And they're behaviours that build trust. And one of the things I like to think of in above the line behaviours, well, when we are operating above the line, is that we are always asking, what else can I do? With a board, operating above the line can be easier said than done, especially when you've got a group of people who come with their own strong opinions and personalities, such as one person who might dominate discussions and decision making and projects. And that's why it's important in the above the line behaviours that we set out individual and collective responsibilities, and also determine how, when, and to whom information about progress and performance is communicated, and those sorts of things. And one thing that I think above the line behaviour that we can't overlook is maintaining confidentiality. Such a big thing
Yeah,
in that
true.
when we're talking about trust, but it's important in above the line behaviour as well. I'd just like to point out here that above the line behaviour isn't about being right. It's more about being the bridge between certainty and uncertainty. When they think about above the line the behaviour, they think that they're having to be right all the time. That's not what it's about.
Mm, mm.
So below the line behaviours like blame, denial, or excuses, and they slowly erode trust away. And I think the classic example of below the line behaviour here is often demonstrated through school students who come up with excuses for the late submission of an assignment or homework project and not taking ownership for the real reason why they're late or that they haven't done the homework. But at board level, trust can be broken when fellow directors or association members have a limited understanding of how a decision is being made. And that can happen when feedback is being pushed aside or when a small minority or individual bias being used in a decision-making process. And something that is often overlooked as a reason for below the line behaviours is that fear of failing can be so debilitating that a board or individuals build up walls between the solving and doing, and it becomes so debilitating that it's much easier for them to operate below the line.
I agree. I agree. I
Yeah,
think the thing that people struggle with is being seen as a failure for it. And one of the questions that I find that's really useful, and do that from a consulting side as well, is you ask the person, did you do the best you could with the resources you had available at the time? And the answer is, if you did, then why do you fear failure? Because, based on what you knew, you made the right decision at the time. Circumstances and conditions can change. You would have probably made a different decision if you would have known of those facts or those conditions were available or present at that time. So
yeah,
I think people have got to be honest and fair to themselves. That comes back to that internal part, to be able to make the right decisions for the
yeah.
organisation, the charity or the non-for-profit that
Yeah.
they're in.
So even the strongest commitment to accountability and building trust doesn't prevent a board from falling below the line
Yeah.
at one time or another, but it's how the board lifts itself up above the line again that really matters, especially in building that and maintaining that trust.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that sort of takes us to the other side of the coin, doesn't it now? Is that
It does.
what about when trust has been damaged? How do you come back from it? So what suggestions have you got from about how to recover trust?
Okay, so that's a great question and something that's really important to think about, because trust is something that can take a long time to build, but it's something that can be shattered in just an instant. And so, in terms of models, there's the trust recovery loop comes in here for dealing with when trust is damaged, and it's a 4-step cycle. So, the first one being where you see it, acknowledge what's really going on, inviting feedback, and I'm facing uncomfortable truths. And in a board that's building that environment where not everyone has to agree all the time, so you can have those open conversations. Second one is owning it. Recognize your role in what has happened, even if it's only the 5% acknowledgement of what's happened. The third step is solving it, asking what else can I do? And that comes through regularly on issues around trust. Stay engaged and take initiative. And the fourth step in the cycle is do it. Commit to action. Do what you say you'll do. Walk the talk.
Yeah, that's true. And being
Yeah.
consistent, obviously, through all those to do it. A good example of that one I've just recently been spending quite a bit of time on the computer system or our website for the association in Victoria. And things that we've put in at particular times, like during COVID, for example, we put some things in COVID and they were very useful during COVID. And now COVID's sort of 3, 4, coming up 5 years away since we've
Mm.
had it. The things that we put in place then really don't apply anymore. And you have to see it and then say, do we really need that anymore? Is that something that's giving value to the organization, but also to members and the public in this case? As much as, from my personal point of view, I had a vested interest in it because I set it up. And then I'm thinking, people are saying it's not of value. And then I took a step back and said, well, am I going to fight for it because it's a personal issue? Or should I look at it and say, no, it's not really applicable anymore because it's not providing the value, and that's a different set of conditions, which is what I said before. Did you do the best you could with the resources you had available at the time? And I've come to the conclusion, well, actually, the other people are correct. It's not giving us what we need, and it's not providing, and it's giving the wrong indication. So really, it's time to let it go and let it phase out and then look at what else you can do. That's a very simple analogy and thing that I've seen from a personal experience over the last week or so that has come up for it.
That is a good example, because you're listening to a strong voice that's coming through saying, do we need that anymore?
Yeah,
And
great.
you've acknowledged that personally, and sometimes it's those personal acknowledgements when we've been so heavily invested in something. But that's how we do maintain trust, when we show that we're listening
Yeah,
to
yeah.
what
I
other
mean,
people.
trust and internal personal integrity come close together as part of those things.
They go hand in hand.
They do. That's what it comes
Yeah,
back to.
yeah.
So let's talk about sustainability. What can boards do to embed trust over the longer term? Because it's not just a short-term item. It's something that we
No.
need to build over a long time. And as you said earlier, that it's hard built and gets lost very quickly. What can boards do in terms of trying to embed this over the longer term period?
I don't think trust is something that can be built in a workshop. It's embedded through habits that you build and develop through feedback loops. And we sort of touched on that when you're listening to what people are saying. And certainly in boards, you're discussing a lot of things on board agendas. So the way you have feedback loops is really important. And just through the sheer way you go about your leadership in a board is important too. So what you want to do is set clear expectations with tools, and a board manual or a board charter is a good way to start there. And that's something that is used from one board to the next. It's something that's great that works through succession on boards as well, and that building that trust over successive boards, including opportunities for including anonymous feedback or trust health check-ins. There's lots of ways you can do that on a board with it or within an organisation. Also, celebrate accountability. Don't make it something that go away hanging your head in shame.
Hmm.
Celebrate it. And especially when someone owns a mistake and steps up and says, look, I've done this. I know something's going to have to be done to fix it. I'd like your help and suggestions on how we can go about fixing this. So over time, these small practices just become the culture that you build in your board, and trust builds and develops through that.
Yes, I agree. Well, we've been speaking for some time, even though it goes quickly once you start, doesn't it? So we've
It
we've
does.
come to the end for the session, and usually what we like to try and do at these things is to provide some practical takeaways for listeners to be able to take with them and have a look and use as quickly as possible for them. What would you say are your five top items on trust that listeners could take away with them?
Okay, I'm happy to do that one, Paul. My top five would be, and right at the top of the list is the above the line, below the line model. And I think you can use that at the beginning of meetings with a 5-minute check-in, just a quick go round the board table, check in on that. Secondly, use the trust recovery loop that we've touched on as well as a reflection tool at the end of meetings. So you've got a beginning of meeting and an end of meeting things to do. Introduce a rotating reality checker role to support truth telling. All manner of tools that you can use there. I like to use a different thing, and I've touched on this, have someone being a devil's advocate in the meeting. That's just a different version of that. Fourthly, run a board workshop using real examples from your governance. And it might be something that you've brought from outside into the board that you can use as a real example. Use real examples to run those workshops and have an open discussion. And lastly, choose one trust building habit to model consistently. If it's accountability, look at that. We've talked about integrity. What can you do to build
Hmm.
a trust building habit that builds integrity? They're not complex, but they're powerful, and trust can be built through repetition, and some of those little tools that or models can be used to build that trust.
Yeah, yeah. The key there is to be consistent in using them, and then you develop that unconscious competence that it becomes part of your psyche and the way that you do business within your organization or you personally
Yeah,
for it. I think that's always important.
yeah.
So
I
I agree,
think
that's
that,
a great list.
yeah, I always think communication, like when you have communication breakdowns, trust is eroded so quickly. And communication isn't just one way communication,
Mm.
it's two way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What I often say to people from what I've found from doing consulting around the world is that there's three fundamental things that most people struggle with, and that is A, communication, B is how to create and maintain relationships, which is what we're talking about aboard. And the third one is conflict. People don't know how to handle conflict and they over respond or they tend to try and hide it, which then becomes illegal. So, so
yes,
those three things are really the foundation of also of trust, and that you've got to communicate, keep your relationships, and know how to handle conflict when things do go wrong, as we said. So I think those are a great list for people to take away, and then they can unpack in their own organizations for what they're doing. By understanding the behaviors that build or break trust and committing to a culture of openness, accountability, and consistency, honorary justice associations can ensure that their boards are not only effective, but also trusted by their members, stakeholders, and the broader community they serve. Rachael, thank you for being here and helping us do a deep dive into such an important topic. And I know it's one that you have very close to your chest from previous
yeah.
discussions. This isn't just about being better board members, it's about being better leaders, as you mentioned for it. So thank you for joining us on this episode, and I look forward to catching up with you again in the near future. And also for our listeners, we look forward to catching up with you again, where we'll continue our look into governance essentials. Until then, lead with presence and operate above the line. And thank you for listening, and bye for now.
Bye for now.